Hello everyone, I'm delighted to be with you. Thanks Hong Suk for leading us in what was quite marvellous worship. It's a wee while since I've been in a setting like this where there has been such a volume of singing, and I heard people singing in harmony as well just behind me, and it was quite wonderful. And to be honest, it would be really easy to believe the lie of the decline of the church, but gathered like this with such numbers and such enthusiasm and worship, to be honest, I am a wee bit daunted. I served for a long time in Ayrshire and I'm not very good with crowds. I support Kilmarnock. But what I'd like us to do tonight for the next hour, I'm hoping to talk for, about half the time, because you don't want to hear me speak. It's much better if you hear from one another. But there are some things I want to say, and I want to use pictures because I was conscious, as Hong Suk had said, that you've had a meal and you've probably travelled a distance and you'll be tired. And I thought that if I showed you some of my holiday snaps, then that might at least keep you awake, and that's what I'm going to do. So, I find it easy to think in pictures, and I'm just offering that to you tonight. I've got 3 sets of pictures. The images are irrelevant. It's the idea that sits behind them that is much more important. So I'm going to warm you up with a picture. So some of you would have used your sat-nav to get here. And you know, if you were travelling up towards the Kincardine Bridge, if you came that way, that there was a point where you saw a fairly big part of Scotland, and the line on the sat-nav wasn't all that detailed because it was showing you that kind of grand overview. Well, that's what I think I'm giving you in this keynote, and I suspect that in one of the 30 seminars tomorrow, my goodness, you'll need to have some stamina, but I think that in those, that's much more like the kind of detailed picture you get on the sat-nav, where the thing kind of focuses in on particular steps that you might take, or individual corners that you might turn. And just to extend that picture once more, if some of you use Waze as a sat-nav, that's a kind of social media thing on your phone. You know that sometimes you see little car balloons which are other users who are also on the journey, and sometimes beside them pops up a little message. So if there's a hold up, you can type into your phone, I think, and as long as it's safe to do so. And the message comes up for everyone else to see, which is, you know, watch out for this or for that. And it strikes me that that's also what you're doing here. And that's why I'm only going to speak for, I think, just over half the time I have. Because it's the social side of this. It's the talking with each other. It's the sharing ideas, learning from different situations and perspectives, and picking up things and being encouraged that if things are hard where you are, then you can get alongside other people who find them hard too. And how delightful it would be if, as part of this time, you found yourself praying with other people to support one another in that way and in other ways through the challenges, and also as we look ahead, seeking God's blessing and help and leading. What an astonishing conference it would be if we came not just to listen, but also to talk and to pray. And I think very much that is what lies before you over this next little while. So did you see that picture of the sat-nav has got nothing to do with how you might have got here, but everything to do with the idea of direction and detail and working together? That's what we're going to do in 3 sets of pictures: a bridge really to nowhere, and a stop on the way, getting by with a little help from our friends, and there's a final one which was out for my tea in Glasgow, because you can do that in Glasgow. Other restaurants are available in other cities, I believe, but they're not as good as Glasgow. Anyway, can I just start by saying something quite serious? If you're an elder, you are called to the highest office in the Church of Scotland. My old minister, Emmanuel Robertson in Armadale, taught me that when I was just a boy. Ministers, the ones who wear the collars, I deliberately didn't wear mine tonight, they are teaching elders. And if you're an elder, you are a ruling elder, but they are all elders. That's why you're ordained, not just because it's a good excuse for a nice part in a good service. Never forget that. It is as we work together, sure, in slightly different but complementary roles, that together we serve Christ's church and Christ's mission and Christ's people. So I think you're probably going to be here because you want to learn more about how to be an elder, a good, helpful, effective elder, maybe comforting, encouraging and urging on fellow believers to live lives worthy of God. That's how Paul puts it in his first letter to the Thessalonians. But I hope too you're also thinking that you might want to be enabling those who aren't yet part of a community of faith to hear and to understand the good news of Jesus Christ all across Scotland, that they might come to share in the glory of our Lord Jesus, because that's part of our calling as elders together too. And that is a journey, and it is hard work, and sometimes we stumble or we struggle or we need to stop and rest, and sometimes it's good just to do that and to have a look at the view. And so, here are some pictures. The problem with my wee clicker, which I've never seen before, is that I've got to press the back button in order to go forward. Clearly it was designed by the Church of Scotland. But here we go. So we're going to travel here and there, and we're going to travel from here to there. Now, don't do it just now, but if you want to see the sensible version of this script, which actually does make coherent sense, which is probably not what my talking is going to do, then you could visit grant-barclay.co.uk and you can get it. But don't do that just now, because it's much more dull. It's accurate, but dull. This is a bit off the wall, but I think a wee bit more lively. So, I'm in Glasgow, I'm South Glasgow, I'm a minister there. I've moved, I've gone up in the world, as it were, from Kilmarnock, but it's only a geographical thing, let me tell you. And I've come across this bridge. This is the old Caledonian Railway Bridge, which I think a number of you will have seen. Of course, it's now the Caledonian Railway Not Bridge. It was built around 1877 and it took trains from the south side of the city across into what is Central Station. But 90 years after it opened, they did re-signalling work in the station and they didn't need the bridge. So the girders and the railway track were removed in 1967 and they left the pillars, these huge iron and granite columns that still sit in the River Clyde. They're all very fancy. They're inscribed by the artist Ian Hamilton Finlay. They're in English and they're in Greek. You know, Glasgow's that kind of cultured place. Oh yes, it is. All greatness stands firm in the storm, it says on the northmost pillar, and the other one is actually in Greek, and if you translate it according to Wikipedia, it says, all great things are perilous, and it's true as the proverb says, that beautiful things are hard to attain. And it is, I mean, it is really impressive, and those pillars are sunk right in to the bottom of the riverbed. They're grand and they're strong, and they've stood there for 150 years, but for a third now of that time, they have been stuck in the mud and are basically redundant. This is a negative set of pictures. It gets much more positive after this, but I did want to start here. They don't do anything. I mean, you might be intrigued when you pass them and you look at them and you think, oh my, I wonder what they are doing there. But they don't do anything. Now, in the last 51 years, people have had to get across the Clyde. It's not like they haven't built new bridges. So I took that from the Bells Bridge. That's the pedestrian bridge that cyclists can also go across. You can see there the Squinty Bridge. And beyond that, you can see the Kingston Bridge. And beyond that again, there's the Squiggly Bridge, which isn't squinty, it's squiggly. You need to go to Glasgow, you need to understand the lingo to understand all of that. So it's not that people haven't been trying to get across the Clyde. They're doing it all the time. But they're not using the old Caledonian Railway Bridge. And it does depress me to think about this a wee bit, but that bridge feels just a wee bit like the Church of Scotland. It is deeply embedded in Scotland's culture. It has stood firm through the storms of the years. It is solid and reliable and dependable. And 25 years ago, when I was setting out in ministry, when I was doing my probation in St Andrews in Bowness, and in the years after that when I went to Kilmarnock, there was a real sense that the brand, or the kind of feeling that the kirk had in Scotland, meant that both in times of joy and crisis, the church was quite simply part of people's landscape. So both in Bowness and in Kilmarnock, people who never went near the church would phone the minister and would expect that the minister would be there. And that will still be the case in many parts of Scotland, but particularly in our urban areas. That no longer matters. In 2016, the Social Attitudes Survey indicated that nearly 60% of Scots said they didn't belong to any particular religion. Back in 1967, that's when they took the top off that bridge across the Clyde. Just under a third of the total population of Scotland were card-carrying members of the Church of Scotland. Now it's fewer than 1 in 10. Scotland has moved on. It's great that greatness stands firm in the storm, but a bridge isn't much use if it doesn't get you to the other side. And I don't think we can now presume that because it was once fine, it will always be fine. So, if form follows function, which is another way of saying that we need to design with some sort of destination in mind, we've got to have some clues about what the church is to be about before we can craft ways of achieving that. And I think one of the dangers is that we aren't as distinctive as we might be, and there are people who have written about that. There's a chap, Thomas Reeves from America, that says that many people these days, and he's speaking about the American situation, fail to see good reasons for committing themselves to mainline church. And I want to encourage you that there is so much that we can be grateful for and properly proud of in church, in faith in Christ, in fellowship, in mission and in service, that there's no reason for us to hang back or to be embarrassed or to be terribly worried about how this might come across. The good news of God's love in Jesus is, I'm sure you agree, and I know we're talking among friends who are kind of like-minded, it is evidently really worthwhile. Our struggle is sometimes in making that apparent in real ways. So, can I suggest to you, and I'm pushing, I hope, at an open door because the conference allows space for this, and I think this is wonderful too. We need to move a wee bit from institution to inspiration and to invitation. I know that sounds awful, like the kind of thing a minister would say, because it begins with the same letter, but I think it's true. We move from institution to inspiration and invitation. Now, I've served my time in the institution, and I moderate a Kirk session. I've been deeply involved in Presbytery of Irvine and Kilmarnock. I can't think there's a better one in the world, although Glasgow's no bad. And I've done a wee bit with some of the councils in the church. And other presbyteries in the East Angus, like Edinburgh, are also available. I don't disagree with you. However, can I say to you that if the institution is a bit like the pillar with no top, what we need is something that will help us make progress. So I love the idea that you might just get up that wee bit earlier and you might go for a walk if the weather's not bad and sense God in nature and worship the God who is found in creation. Or that you might read your Bibles, and you've all got these smartphones, so you know that it's easy to do that. At the moment I'm using the Celebrating Common Prayer wee thing that I think comes from the Anglican Church, and I used to use the book, but I couldn't work the book because you had to jump about all over the place. But here, the one that's free online allows you just to click the hyperlink and it takes you to the next psalm that you need to get to. What could be easier? You could do that, or you could do whatever is familiar. But I really encourage you to think about developing and continuing that sense of nurturing your inner devotional life. I think we ought to emphasise the serious work of regularly and intentionally recognising God's presence in all of life, and that means in our own lives. Concentrate on following Jesus' exhortations in the way that we live. How did he live? What did he teach us? Let's continue to put that into practice, not only in how we deal with one another, but how we now engage with this desperately fragile planet. And shouldn't we engage more broadly rather than more narrowly with others to discover the God who is in our midst and the God who leads us on? I think we do all of this through these personal devotional times, and then we do them collaboratively and corporately as we gather to worship together. And I know that it is hugely un-Presbyterian to share what we think about deep things to do with our faith. And when I was doing my research, I discovered that it was just like a stone wall, and for all sorts of reasons people found it really hard to get over that. And I had the trick of using video to try to break things down. I'm delighted that Ray is videoing this, because I think that video has some potential to be useful either road. When people said a wee bit on camera, which was really daunting, they were able to see what other people said. And at that point, they began to scale the wall. And it didn't take folks like you in churches very long to discover that the thing that they thought was difficult, speaking about faith, which they connected with all sorts of senses of inadequacy or judgment if they had the wrong answer, in truth was just what everybody felt. And when we didn't worry about it and just spoke about our experience and our thoughts and where we felt we were being led and what we didn't understand, we made so much more progress together. So I want to encourage you that maybe this weekend is a weekend for taking your courage in your hands and for speaking to people you don't know that well about things you do know really well and really, really matter to you, and discover that as we discuss them so we can grow together. You've just no idea. I had no idea until I came across this, just how profoundly powerful talking to friends and colleagues, sisters and brothers in Christ can be. But it's taken that early step to be courageous enough to say, what do you think about this? How do you find that? Where do you think we're going? Can I leave that notion with you? The pillars are there. We've got good governance. We've got effective structures. We don't need to worry about that. We need to keep them because they matter. And because we've got premises all over Scotland, that's great, because it means that nobody's all that far from a community of faith of some kind or other. But these are the days when we need to move from pillars which are solid, stayed and stuck, to enable inspired, committed, Spirit-led progress. And who knows, maybe it was just for such a time as this that God called you and us together to be here and to do this work in these days and in these months and in these years. So that's my first picture. Here's the second one. Now, this all sounds very grand, and it's not. For family health reasons, and the NHS covered all the cost. You have no idea what a blessing the health service is, but I don't have time to explain that just now. My daughter and I were out in America, and we were driving east through Texas to Amarillo. Somebody told me that that was the way. They did, however, not promise that sweet Marie would be waiting for me. And let me tell you, she wasn't. Anyway, after a couple of hours driving, I needed to stop for a cup of tea. And we pulled in at Russell's truck stop. Now, you know, my daughter, who knows about these things, is sitting on her phone and she says, "Oh, Dad, this one gets good reviews and all that, so this is the one to go to." And it's on Route 66, so it is, I'll just show you, it's a kind of 1960s diner, but they've also got a wee museum where they've got the kind of cars that you would drive along that road in those days. And I was able just to wallow in that sense that the sun was shining, and I had one of these fancy open-topped motors. My wee Hyundai wasn't bad, but it wasn't nearly as nice as that. And as I wandered round and a wee look at the old motorbikes and the gas tanks, as they would call them, I saw something in the middle distance. And you can probably see it too, with the stained glass and the cross on the door. Well, blow me. In Russell's truck stop, which is just your ordinary motorway service station, they've got a sanctuary. And every Sunday, they actually do hold services in there. It looks like that. I mean, it's terribly Presbyterian. They've got rows of chairs and a telly. You know, I almost felt as though I was at home. And I spoke to the chap behind the desk who was serving the coffee and things and said, "What's this about?" And he said, "Well, you've got no idea. We hold the service there on a Sunday, but the church is open all day, every day. And see folk that are just travelling along what is their equivalent, I suppose, of the M8, they can wander in, and it's there, and it's a quiet place for people to reflect and to pray or to think." And I don't know how many of the staff were necessarily Christian, but the boy that was serving me my coffee clearly was. And he said, "You know, there's the opportunity for us just to talk to people. If they come up and ask something, then we're here for them." And I was really attracted by, now, of course, I'm a boring minister, so I love the idea that you can still have chairs in rows. And there's a lectern, you know what I mean? It's got everything that you would want if you were a minister. But here, it's a stop on the way as people go about their ordinary business. There is church to some extent, meeting people where they are. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that we phone Sybil's and we get a porta-cabin with a big neon cross and we install it at the Orchardhill services. But I tell you, we'd get on Reporting Scotland if we did. But forget the location. What about the idea that as Christian people, we might somehow make it possible for people in deeply helpful ways to encounter the living God right where they are on their journey on the way? Churches are making huge strides towards this, I know. But generally our services are still on a Sunday morning, and they are still done in a particular style. And of course that works for the people for whom it works, and we don't want to stop that. But there are all sorts of other possibilities, and you know that Fresh Expressions means that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So if you don't know about this, you should visit the Mission Discipleship Resourcing Mission website and see lots of stuff. Thousands of Fresh Expressions, all mainly across England and Wales, but now in Scotland too, show us the kind of creative things that we could do, because other people in these islands are doing them, in order to be real stops on the way, real filling stations for people in their faith. Some of these stories are quite energising. And I encourage you to have a look at that and have a think about some of these possibilities, and then go back and speak to others in your own congregation, or as congregations get together to do all sorts of creative things, in order that where people are, we might meet them and then together walk forward. So keep them going, because you're the people you need to hear from, not me. But here's the final wee set of pictures. This is about a little help from my friends. Last November, I rose early one Saturday, it's not my style, and drove up to Loch Long. It was a calm autumn morning, it wasn't too cold, and that nice Christopher on the telly the night before had, you know, Christopher Blanchett, he'd said that the sun was going to shine. So I thought, I've never been up the cobbler, I'll give it a hurl. And true enough, it looked fantastic, don't you think? And I was raring to go, and it was fine, except that once I got up to near where the stony bit is, the weather closed in, and those of you who have climbed it know that there's a kind of sharp turn to the left, and then there's what looks like a stone staircase. I used to have to climb up, I don't know, 100 and odd big stone steps, and with every step I climbed, the sleet got heavier. 3/4 of the way up, it turned to snow, and at the top, it was a blizzard. So I genuinely hadn't a clue what was going on, and I couldn't see very far, so I did what all good hill walkers do. I found a wee corner, and I sat down and opened my flask and ate my sandwiches. I had left early, it was only 9:30 in the morning, but I was desperate, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. So that's roughly what it looked like. You know, that's what it was, okay? And that's kind of what it looked like. And I wasn't at the top. So I was crouched in this little kind of cubby hole in the rock. And then, as it were, and it was at that point that I discovered two things. First thing was that there's no phone signal up at the cobbler. And the second thing I discovered was that the really detailed map that I'd had a look at and downloaded the night before hadn't, in fact, downloaded to my phone, because I can't work it the way my daughter can work it. So I was literally up there without any clue as to where I was meant to go. I know it's not the right thing to do, and you shouldn't follow my example, but I did know where those stone stairs were. And at that point, so that was 3/4 of the way through a rather stale cheese and pickle roll, I was thinking, it was a good attempt, but I think I'll just wander down and come back when the weather is better. And just at that point, Michael and Jacqueline, whom of course I didn't know from Adam and Eve, appeared over the steps, and they asked me for directions. Well, what were they to know? So, of course, I didn't feign ignorance, I feigned knowledge, and I wandered across, and I was really pleased to see that he had downloaded that little map onto his phone. So we all kind of stood around his smartphone in the snow and had a wee look, and I was pretty sure that I was near the top, because I was completely out of breath, and I'd been going at this for a good couple of hours, and I knew I didn't have all that far to go, but also knew there was a fairly steep bit at the side. I didn't want to get too close to that. So we kind of inched our way around, the three of us, because we now had some half a clue as to where we were going. And there's nothing like walking with other people who are quite cheery and Glaswegian and lost. And you probably need to have those three things for it to work well, for me to feel, oh, well, let's keep going here. Well, I tell you, we clambered up this wee stony bit and got up, and then it got flat, and it looked like there was no more to climb. And, you know, my expertise makes me think that if you can't see any higher bit to go to, you must be pretty near the summit. Well, as it happens, now, I didn't plan it like this, and clearly Christopher knew more than I did. It looked like that. I didn't actually climb up that bit, I just took a picture of it. That's next time when I go. But it started to clear, and it looked like that. And it was just wonderful, and it made my heart sing. And, well, you can tell I'm really proud. So I'll just show you another picture because I can. All right, it was fantastic. I had been ready to retrace my steps and head home without seeing anything. I met some other people. I think each one of the three of us knew that none of us knew everything. That's why it took the three of us to get up to the top. But together, we were able to make progress to a site that I still remember, as you can see, with real fondness. As God's people work together, as they enjoy friendship and as they make God-focused progress, I think they discover things beyond any of them to have imagined. And I've experienced that kind of thing in church. Not all the time. You know, I've been at pretty dull session meetings. I've been at pretty terrible general assemblies as well. And I tell you, some of them I've been nearer the front than I wanted to be. And that's just how life is at times. But I've been at worship services. I've been engaged sometimes in mission. I've been involved when I've had the privilege of praying with people, and I've heard people praying for me, and I've been in study groups, or I've sat beside people at their bedsides, or I've taken part in marriage or funeral services, and the hairs on the back of my neck have stood up, and I have thought, oh my gosh and golly, that's a kind of, well, I mean, they taught us that at New College. That was a kind of deep theological phrase, oh my gosh and golly. This feels real. Have you had that? You must have had that sense too, that God is right there by my side, by our side. God is right there with us. And I know that that's a kind of mountaintop type of thing, but I don't want to do it down, because it's there too, and that's part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus and to experience that together. God is among God's people, and we are God's people, and we might rightly expect, therefore, that God is in our midst. And I think it is as we are courageous enough and insightful enough and make enough effort and take enough time to wait on God that we discover these things to be true. And I suspect that probably more than me, you can remember times when your heart has sung. And as elders together, ministers, teaching elders and ruling elders, we all elders, I think, are in the business of helping ourselves and many, many other people discover that God is right by our side. What a fantastic privilege. I mean, well, you know, now and again, I look at my pals and I think, maybe I should have stayed in the day job. And then I was kneeling at Jean's bedside, because Jean died 3-4 weeks ago, and she had had dementia for the last 5 or 6 years. So as the minister in Orchardhill, where I am, I had never known her as the lady she was. So she was a poor soul, and I was her minister, and I really appreciated being that. Then I spoke to her pals, who told me about this feisty, lively lady who used to play tennis when she was young, who was never at church without her nails perfectly manicured and varnished. This is Giffnock after all. Am I allowed to say that? Posh places in Edinburgh are also available, I think. And she was always beautifully dressed, and she had a really sharp sense of humour. And at the wee tea after the funeral, I had this completely different picture of this wonderful woman. But the thing was that for, 70 years, she had been a faithful member of that congregation. For 60 of those 70 years, she'd been actively involved in it. She'd been involved in the Sunday school, and she'd been in the guild, and she'd done the flowers, and she'd been there faithfully in worship. And for the last 10 years, when life was harder for her, the church had been there through many friends, her elder visiting regularly, and then, you know, the new minister turning up too, just from time to time. I'm just a tiny part of that cog, but I think, wow, you can keep your day job if this is the calling of ministry. And that is not the calling of ministers, that's the calling of ministry. And you know as elders that that is your calling too. And in fact, in many ways, because you are able to deal more deeply with individual families and with groups of people, that may in fact be more often your experience than it is a minister's. Treasure that and hold on to it tightly and closely. I think it is part of God's gift to us as God's people together. Of course, it also makes us think, how are we doing our visiting? Is having a district, is going, knocking on the doors time after time where we get a polite response, but then people don't come to church. Is that the best way to carry on? I'm not sure that it is, but I'm not sure that it isn't. And I do know that in these days we need to think very differently about things. I used to phone all my members. It was a wee church in Kilmarnock. It was much smaller by the time I'd left it. But that wasn't wholly my fault, honest. But I remember that we changed things, and the elders got on with running the show, and I did all the pastoral work. And I used to say, you'll know that Kilmarnock has its fair share of rain. It's in Ayrshire after all. So I would sit at home with a milky coffee and my slippers on, phoning all my pals. I think I had about 150 households that I could phone. And I have to say to you, it's not the only way to do it. And when I did say it at Presbytery, they were not only disbelieving, they were about to sanction me for not doing a proper job as a minister, because they didn't think you could do ministry in your slippers. I beg to differ, because I got to know many of these people far better, because the phone is so much more intimate than knocking the door, especially if you're wearing a plastic collar and you've got to make small talk. I'm not saying it is the only way. I'm saying that there are different ways of doing these sorts of things. And so let's think creatively. Let's think out the box. Let's be courageous enough to try things, maybe to see them fail, but also to observe them succeed and discover that our God of the new thing might be encouraging us in new ways, and we might see real success in all sorts of ways through all of that. So there are my three pictures. The bridge that isn't so much of a bridge, the stop on the way, and getting by with some help from our friends. And I want to finish by talking about my tea out. One of the trustees of the Church of Scotland, they're all terribly highfalutin and clever people, and they're all well connected. Goodness knows how I ever got involved with them, but I did. Anyway, one of them took me out for tea and introduced me to his friend. His friend, I think, is, the sort of person that you might want as an elder in the church. Now, he happens to be a man, but he could have equally have been a woman. So he's a professional in a big international firm. He lives in central Scotland, and he's deeply involved in his church, but not a Church of Scotland church. And I want you to pick his brains as somebody who was in his early 40s, who's kind of settled in life, to work out what for him worked. Why did he go to church, and why did he go to the kind of church that he went to? So, my friend paid the bill, which was really nice. And I did some of the listening and recorded conversation, and I had written out wee cards beforehand because I wanted to take it seriously. I just laid them out, had to move the salt and pepper and the wine glasses out of the way, but there was enough room on the table. And this is what the chap, he was right into this, so this was all okay. And he laid out, you might not see that because the screen's not brilliant, but I'll explain. I asked him to lay out in order from the things that were most important to him to the things that were least important to him. And because he thought in kind of grids and squares and all of that, he thought this was grand. And I really want to think about the ones on the far left. So he went for the things in church that are most important as liveliness, worship, and the vibe. I wasn't sure what to write on these cards, and I just made up a whole pile of them. And he thought that those were, in fact, the three most important things. He said, church has got to be lively, otherwise it's boring. I think that's rather stating the obvious, but maybe you need that to be stated. The Bible's not dull, and Jesus wasn't dull, so, ... I got the message. The cardinal sin he thought a church commits is to be boring. And so for him, liveliness, particularly as it was expressed through meaningful worship and what I'm calling the vibe, that kind of sense, that flavour, that atmosphere, that impression you get, for him, that's what really mattered. Now, just as well my dinner was getting paid for, because at this point I was gutted, because I had read across to the right-hand side as you're looking at it, and I had thought, come on, my friend, worship, the quality of liturgy and prayer, surely that's what matters. He put that right down at the bottom of his list. And here I'm a minister doing my level best, week in, week out, to have, a liturgy that looks kind of sensible and prayers that make some kind of sense. Now, I'm sure that those things do matter. And he is just one person. And all I'm suggesting is that we could ask people and we could get their views. And when we do that, we might have to change what we think. But when I heard your singing earlier as Hong Sut was playing, and it all seemed quite simple and doable and achievable, I thought, there is life here. And I rather suspect that you thought the same thing, that there was a vibe of worship. I don't mean by that there's some kind of inappropriate, frothy sentimentality that doesn't mean anything. What I think I mean by that is that there's a real depth encounter among people and between people and God, and the privilege we have as elders, and increasingly as elders who have the privilege and the responsibility of being involved in crafting and then in leading worship. That's what we are about. And I'm sure that's happening all over the place. And I'm sure it's happening in your churches. And because it's happening in your church, I want to say all power to your elbow, and may God bless you and encourage you in the work that you are doing. But never give up and never stop doing it. And it might be that if you're struggling and you feel that you're kind of pushing a stone up a hill on your own, that this kind of conference is the place to come and be re-energized, to discover in vital worship that sense of liveliness, so that together we might move on. So I offer you those pictures and those ideas, and I just want to finish by saying that there are two things about those collections of pictures that also matter. The first thing is that somebody helped me. So I read a wee bit about the bridge, because I'm clearly not old enough to remember anything about it myself. And I spoke with a chap behind the counter who sold me coffee at Russell's truck stop. And I met Michael and Jacqueline, as you know, up on the hillside. And I recorded the conversation over dinner with Andy. All these people mattered. It's always about people. And you know that people mattered to Jesus. And you know that people matter to Christ's church today. So who today will be the human catalysts and the coordinators? Who today will be the midwives and the motivators of the new life into which God is clearly calling his church in these challenging times? Well, it's easier for me to see that answer than it is for you, because all that you can see are the backs of the heads of the answer, and I can see all your faces, because that's the answer, and you are the answer. In God's providing, in God's grace, you are, I think, in this time, God's gift to Christ's church in our land and slightly beyond. Elders, ruling elders and teaching elders all together, working creatively, stepping out in faith, risking a lot, learning, relying on each other all the time. That's what we are doing. And the other thing about these pictures is that they are all about travelling. I didn't realise that that would be the picture on the front of the guidebook. It's astonishing how all these things just fit together, but there you go. We cannot stay where we are as a proper response to the one who invites us by saying, "Follow me." The clue has to be in the verb. Christ's words demand that we get moving. And I really do hope and pray that this weekend will be a weekend where you can take the next steps. Not the first steps. Hey, you're here, and many of you are elders. You've already taken many steps. But if those steps are wearier and slower than you would like, well, here's the chance to meet with others and to move on, to explore and discover and to learn from. I mean, they get me on because I'm just the warm-up act. See, when you get the real superstars like Dan, who grew up in Orchardhill Church, and his mum and his brother still go there, and Sally and Martin and Norman. I mean, these are the people who really know their onions. So listen to them and learn from them and be energised and encouraged by them. And don't forget the people who are sitting beside you right now. Because it is as we continue to encourage each other, to keep in touch with each other somehow, to be accountable perhaps to each other, to learn from each other, and to urge one another on, that I think we will continue to see God doing astonishing things in our midst. And even through this church, which many people might have written off, but which has not been written off by God. We are the people God is calling now. So what are the steps that you are planning to take? I'd like you to speak to each other. You get 25 minutes to do it, because I almost, and I don't do this on a Sunday, finish in time. Here are 5 questions. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. I would just pick your favourite. So I wouldn't look at them all. I would look at one and maybe 2, and I'll shout in in 10 minutes time, and you can swap over. And you can either, if you're sitting beside people that you know, I'd encourage you to move, because you can talk to them anytime because you know them. No, is that not fair? But if you're already sitting beside people with whom you didn't come and whom you don't know very well, here's a great chance to get to know them better. So I'm not saying that you should move, but I am saying that in wee groups of 2 or 3 or 4, and although the seats aren't brilliant, some of you could turn round and form a wee group of 4 as you talk to the 2 people behind you or the 2 people in front or whatever, but you can work all of that out. Here are some questions. They're based on the pictures and the ideas that sit behind the pictures. So the first one's about that bridge thing, and if that's a helpful question, look at it. If it's not, just ignore it. What do you think? Is eldership about a commitment to prayer and study, worship and honest reflection, and engaging with others to love our global neighbours? That was one of the fancy quotes in my written script that I don't think I actually managed to get out. But never mind, if I had got it out, it would have been a good one to say. Or maybe it wouldn't. What do you think? Because you're the experts. I'd like you to have a wee think about that. How might you, where you are, offer a place on the journey for people who live and work right where you are? And who are the companions or the individuals on your faith journey with whom you can team up? Who are the people there who are a ready resource to help you as you continue to move on? And would liveliness, an upbeat vibe and invigorating praise be must-haves in your church? And they may already be, and it would be really good to hear about that as well. But if those aren't the things that would really stimulate you, then what would your top 3 be? And it'd be really interesting to hear. There are no right answers. Nothing is set in stone. It's all about conversation. It's all about sharing. It's all about journeying. It's all about exploring. It's all about the adventure. And it's all about doing that in company with the risen Christ who leads us on and who says, "Follow me." So, together, let's go and let's follow. Amen.